People like you are lucky to even be in this room. The words don't just land, they echo, sharp and clean, cutting through the polished silence of the glass-walled conference room like something far more permanent than sound, and for a moment, no one breathes, not the senior managers seated around the 12-foot walnut table, not the assistants hovering near the walls with tablets in hand, not even Emily Carter, who stands at the far end with a folder clutched just a little too tightly against her chest, her knuckles pale but her face, still composed, unreadable, as if she's learned long ago that dignity is sometimes the only thing no one can take unless you let them. And across from her, Alexander Hayes doesn't blink, his expression calm, almost bored, the kind of calm that comes from knowing every person in the room answers to him, from knowing his name alone can build or break careers with a single sentence, and right now, he's choosing to break one. This isn't a charity, he continues, his voice even, measured, like he's discussing quarterly numbers instead of a human being. We don't keep employees who can't deliver at the level this company demands. And there it is, the shift, subtle but devastating, because it's not just criticism, it's dismissal, it's judgment, it's a public line drawn in front of everyone that says she doesn't belong, and a few eyes flicker toward Emily, then away just as quickly, no one daring to hold the moment too long, because in this room, silence isn't neutrality. It's survival. Emily swallows once, barely noticeable, her gaze steady on the presentation screen behind Alex where her own work is still projected, charts she spent nights perfecting, strategies she rewrote until sunrise, ideas she never signed her name to because she was told. Team contributions don't need individual credit. And for a split second, something almost flickers in her eyes, not anger, not tears, something quieter, something that feels like a door closing. But when she speaks, her voice is soft, controlled. I understand. And it's that response, that lack of defense, that seems to irritate Alex more than anything, because he's used to reactions, excuses, emotion, something he can push against, but she gives him nothing, and that absence lingers heavier than any argument could have, stretching the moment just long enough for discomfort to settle into the room before he exhales and taps his pen against the table. Good, he says, already moving on, already done with her. HR will finalize everything by the end of the day. Like she's a task being checked off, like she was never essential, like the past 2 years didn't exist, and just like that, it's over. Chairs shift, screens dim, conversations resume in low, cautious tones as if nothing significant just happened, but Emily doesn't move right away. She stands there for 1 extra second, maybe 2, long enough to take in the room she fought to stay in, long enough to let the weight of what just happened settle into something solid, something real, and then she nods once, more to herself than anyone else, and turns, walking toward the door with quiet steps that don't echo nearly as loudly as his words did, but somehow leave a deeper mark, and behind her, Alex doesn't look up, not even once, because to him, she's already gone, already irrelevant, already forgotten, and that's the mistake he doesn't realize he's just made. The hallway outside the conference room feels colder than it should, the kind of cold that does not come from temperature but from the sudden absence of belonging, and Emily Carter walks through it with the same steady pace she had inside, her heels tapping softly against the polished floor, measured, controlled, as if every step is a decision not to break, not here, not where anyone might still be watching. And only when the glass doors slide shut behind her does she finally exhale, slow and quiet, like she has been holding her breath for far longer than just that meeting, because the truth is this did not start today, it did not start with his words or that room or the way people avoided her eyes, it started months ago, maybe longer, in late nights under fluorescent lights when the office emptied out and she stayed behind, rewriting proposals that would later be presented by someone else. Fixing numbers that would later be praised under a different name, building strategies that carried the company forward while her own name stayed buried in email threads marked internal, invisible, replaceable, just like he said, and she pulls her phone from her bag now, her thumb hovering over the screen for a second before unlocking it, scrolling through a long chain of drafts she never sent. Messages addressed to Alexander Hayes that begin with words like "I wanted to clarify" or "I believe there has been a misunderstanding," all carefully written, all carefully deleted, Because somewhere along the way she learned that explaining yourself to someone who has already decided who you are is a losing battle, and that lesson sits heavier than the termination notice she has not even opened yet. The elevator ride down is silent except for the soft hum of cables and the faint reflection of her face in the mirrored walls, and she studies it for a moment, not searching for tears, not expecting them, just confirming something to herself, that she is still here, still standing, still intact in ways that matter more than a job title or a paycheck. And when the doors open to the lobby, the city greets her the way it always does. Indifferent and alive, yellow taxis sliding past in a constant stream, people moving with purpose, coats pulled tight against a late afternoon wind, a world that does not pause just because one person's life has shifted direction, and for a second, she stands there on the sidewalk, the envelope now in her hand, unopened, uncreased, as if what is inside it only becomes real the moment she looks, and maybe that is why she does not open it yet, not because she is afraid of what it says, but because she already knows, and knowing without seeing gives her one last moment of control. Her phone buzzes then, pulling her back, a hospital notification flashing across the screen, a reminder of a bill due by the end of the week, and just like that, reality sharpens, because this was never just about pride or respect. It was about rent, about medication, about keeping everything from collapsing at once, and she closes her eyes briefly, steadying herself, not in defeat, but in recalculation. Because if there is one thing she has always done well, it is adapt, adjust, rebuild quietly without asking for permission, and when she opens her eyes again, the hesitation is gone, replaced by something firmer, something clearer, and she finally tears open the envelope, scanning the lines quickly, efficiently, no wasted motion, no lingering, just confirmation of what she already accepted the moment he spoke. And then she folds the paper neatly, slipping it back inside as if it is just another document, another task completed, another step forward, because to everyone inside that building, she may have just lost everything, but standing there on the edge of a city that never notices who rises or falls, Emily Carter is already doing what they never expected her to do. She is beginning again. That night does not come with silence, it comes with numbers, with calculations that stack up faster than she can push them away, and Emily sits at the small kitchen table in her apartment, the overhead light flickering just slightly, casting a soft uneven glow over a space that feels tighter than it did just 24 hours ago, because now every inch of it carries a question: how long can she keep this? How long before something has to give? And spread out in front of her are papers she has memorized by heart: rent due in 4 days, a hospital statement folded at the corner from being opened too many times, a list she wrote herself with careful handwriting that used to feel organized but now just feels like a countdown, and for a moment she allows herself to sit completely still, not moving, not thinking, just breathing in the quiet that follows a day that changed everything, but even that does not last long. Because her phone lights up again, a message from the hospital, confirming an appointment, and that is all it takes to pull her forward again, because stopping is not an option, not for her, not for the people depending on her. She reaches for her laptop then, the same one she used night after night at the office after everyone else had gone home, the same screen that once held presentations worth millions of dollars, and now it opens to a blank document, the cursor blinking at her like it is waiting for something she has not yet decided how to say, and slowly, carefully, she begins to type, not excuses, not explanations, but facts, projects she contributed to, strategies she built, results that can be measured and proven, things she never claimed before because she did not think she needed to, because she believed her work would speak for itself, and maybe it did, just not in a way that protected her. And as the words fill the page, something shifts, subtle but steady. Because for the first time she is not writing to fit into someone else's expectations, she is writing to be seen, fully and clearly, even if it is by someone who has never met her. Hours pass without her noticing, the city outside her window dimming into late night, headlights tracing quiet lines across the walls, and when she finally leans back, her shoulders ache and her eyes burn slightly, but the document in front of her is complete, not perfect, but real. And she reads through it once, then twice, making small adjustments, tightening sentences, removing anything that sounds uncertain. Until what remains is something simple and undeniable, proof that she was never what he said she was, not replaceable, not lucky to be there, but essential in ways no one bothered to acknowledge, and for a second, just a second, she thinks about sending it to him, attaching every file, every timestamp, every piece of evidence that could rewrite the story he told about her in that room, but the thought fades almost as quickly as it comes, because this is not about convincing him anymore. It is about moving forward without needing his approval. She closes the email window without sending it, saving the document under a new name instead, something that belongs to her, and then she opens another tab, job listings, smaller companies, startups, places that do not have glass walls or 12-foot tables but might have something far more valuable, space to be heard, and as she scrolls, one listing catches her attention, not because of the salary or the title, but because of a single line buried in the description, looking for someone who builds, not just someone who follows, and her fingers pause over the keyboard for a brief moment before she clicks, uploading the document she just created, attaching everything she never showed before, and when she finally hits send, it does not feel like a risk, it feels like a decision, quiet, deliberate, and entirely her own, and somewhere in the distance of a city that never slows down, something begins to shift in ways she cannot yet see. Because while one door closed in a room full of people who underestimated her, another has just opened in a place where she will not have to prove she belongs, she will simply show it. Morning arrives faster than she expects, not because she sleeps well but because her mind never fully lets go of the quiet urgency pressing beneath everything, and when Emily Carter steps out of her apartment just after 7, the air carries that crisp early chill that wakes you up whether you are ready or not. The kind of morning where the city feels sharper, more honest, and for the first time in a long time. She is not walking toward a place that makes her feel smaller, she is walking towards something unknown, and somehow that feels lighter, even with everything still hanging over her, because uncertainty, at least, does not come with judgment already attached. The building she approaches is nothing like the one she left behind, no towering glass, no polished marble floors stretching into a lobby designed to impress, just a modest brick exterior tucked between a coffee shop and a print studio, the kind of place most people would walk past without noticing, and yet there is something about it that feels intentional, like it was built for function instead of image. And she pauses just outside the door for a brief second, adjusting the strap of her bag, grounding herself in the simple reality of where she is. Because this is not a second chance given to her, this is one she is choosing to take. Inside, the space is open but not intimidating, desks arranged in a way that feels collaborative rather than hierarchical, white boards filled with half-finished ideas, handwritten notes layered over printed charts, and conversations that sound less like presentations and more like people actually thinking out loud, and it is in that moment, before anyone even speaks to her, that she realizes how different this is, how different it feels to be in a place where ideas are still forming instead of being polished into something presentable for approval. And before she can take another step, a voice breaks through her thoughts, warm, steady, not rushed. "You must be Emily." She turns, and for a second she is caught off guard, not because of who he is, but because of how he says it, like he already knows something about her beyond what is written on a resume. And the man standing in front of her offers a small, genuine smile, extending his hand without hesitation. "Daniel Brooks," he says, his tone easy, grounded, the kind of confidence that does not need to be displayed loudly to be felt, and when she shakes his hand, there is no evaluation in his eyes, no silent calculation of whether she belongs here, just presence, just attention, something she did not realize she had been missing until now. "I read your submission last night," he continues, gesturing toward a nearby desk where a printed version of her document rests, edges marked with notes, real notes, not dismissals, not assumptions, but questions, ideas, engagement. "You built something impressive there." And for a moment, Emily does not respond right away, not because she does not have something to say, but because she is adjusting to the unfamiliar weight of being acknowledged without needing to defend herself first, and she finally nods slightly, her voice steady when it comes. "Thank you?" Daniel studies her for a brief second, not in a way that feels invasive, but in a way that suggests he is paying attention beyond the surface. And then he steps aside, motioning toward the rest of the space. "We are not perfect," he says simply. "But we build things here, and we give credit where it is due." And there is something in that sentence, something direct and unembellished, that lands deeper than any promise could, because it is not trying to convince her, it is just stating what is. And as she walks further into the room, something shifts again, not dramatic, not sudden, but steady, like a foundation being placed. One layer at a time, because for the first time since everything changed, she is not stepping into a role defined by someone else's expectations, she is stepping into a space where she might finally be allowed to define it herself, and somewhere far across the city, in a building that still reflects power and control in every polished surface. Alexander Hayes has no idea that the person he dismissed so easily is already standing in a place that will soon become everything he cannot ignore. The first few days pass without ceremony, without the kind of dramatic turning point people expect when a life changes direction, and yet everything about them feels different in ways that are hard to explain but impossible to ignore, because here, in this smaller office with uneven desks and ideas still in motion, Emily is not waiting to be told what she is worth, she is showing it piece by piece, decision by decision. And for the first time, those pieces are not being quietly reassigned or overlooked, they are being noticed, built upon, respected, and it starts with something simple, a strategy meeting on a Wednesday morning where she speaks up, just once at first, her voice steady but careful, offering an adjustment to a projection that does not quite align with market behavior, and instead of silence or dismissal, Daniel leans forward slightly, nodding as if he expected her to say something like that, asking a follow-up question that invites her deeper into the conversation, rather than pushing her out of it, and that small exchange shifts something inside her more than any formal title ever could, because it confirms what she already knew but had no space to prove before, that she does not need to fight to be heard when she is in the right room. Days turn into a rhythm, not easy, not effortless, but real, long hours that feel purposeful instead of draining, conversations that build instead of break down, and gradually, the work begins to take shape. A new client proposal that carries her structure, her logic, her signature in ways she no longer hides, and when the team gathers to review it, there is no confusion about where the ideas came from, no hesitation in acknowledging her contribution, just a clear, direct recognition that lands without noise but carries weight, and for a moment she allows herself to feel it, not pride in the loud sense, but something quieter, something steadier, like standing on ground that no longer shifts beneath her feet. Outside of work, the reality of her situation has not disappeared, the bills are still there, the responsibilities still pressing forward, but even those begin to feel different when she is no longer carrying the weight of being unseen, and one evening, as she gathers her things to leave, Daniel walks beside her toward the door, his pace unhurried. His presence consistent in a way that does not demand attention but offers it when needed, and as they step out into the cool evening air, he glances at her briefly, thoughtful rather than curious. "You know," he says, his tone casual but intentional. "You did not just help that project today, you changed the direction of it." And she pauses slightly at that, not because she doubts it, but because she is still adjusting to hearing it said out loud, and she gives a small nod, her response simple. "I just did what made sense." And he smiles at that, not dismissing it, but understanding it. "Exactly," he replies. "That is what we need." And there is no exaggeration in his voice, no attempt to impress, just a statement that feels grounded in something real. And as they walk a few steps further, the city moving around them in its usual steady flow, something settles between them, not something dramatic or immediate, but a quiet alignment, built on respect first, something that does not rush, does not push, just exists in a way that feels solid. Across the city, in a space defined by control and precision, Alexander Hayes sits alone in his office long after most of the lights have gone out, a file open in front of him that he has not read twice, his focus drifting in a way that rarely happens, because something has begun to feel off, small inconsistencies in recent reports, gaps in execution that should not be there, and although he does not say it out loud, not even to himself, there is a subtle shift in his thinking, a question, forming at the edge of his awareness, one he has not yet connected to a name, but one that will not stay unanswered for long, because the absence he created is beginning to reveal itself, not in noise, but in the quiet places where something essential used to be. The shift does not happen all at once, it builds quietly, piece by piece, until one moment finally forces everything into focus, and for Alexander Hayes, that moment arrives on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room that suddenly feels too large for the number of people sitting in it. The presentation screen glowing with numbers that should make sense but do not, projections slightly off. Timelines just delayed enough to raise questions, and for the first time in a long time, he finds himself asking for clarification more than once, his tone still controlled, still precise, but edged with something unfamiliar, something closer to irritation than authority. Because the answers he is receiving are not wrong, they are just incomplete, lacking the clarity he has come to expect without ever questioning where that clarity came from. "Run that again," he says, leaning back slightly in his chair, eyes narrowing just enough to signal that this is no longer routine, and the analyst at the front hesitates, adjusting the slide, repeating the explanation with more detail this time. But even as the words fill the room, something does not align, something subtle but persistent, like a missing piece that no one has identified yet, and Alex exhales slowly, tapping his pen once against the table before speaking again, his voice quieter now, more deliberate. "Who built this model?" The question lands differently than the ones before it, because this one is not about numbers, it is about ownership, about origin, and for a second, no one answers, not out of defiance, but because the answer is not as clear as it should be, and finally someone speaks, naming a department, not a person, and that is when the irritation sharpens into something else entirely, something more focused, more precise. Because Alex has never tolerated ambiguity when it comes to accountability, and now it is everywhere. The meeting ends without resolution, conversations trailing off into uncertainty instead of conclusion, and as the room empties, Alex remains seated for a moment longer, his gaze fixed on the blank screen, replaying the exchange in his mind, not the numbers, not the delays, but the absence of something he cannot quite name, something that used to be there without him noticing. Something that made everything work just a little more seamlessly than it does now, and slowly, almost reluctantly, a connection begins to form. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to shift his attention in a direction he has not looked since the day he dismissed her. Later that evening, in the quiet of his office, he opens archived files, scrolling through past reports, older projections, documents he signed off on without hesitation, and as he moves through them, patterns emerge, consistency, precision, a level of detail that feels different from what he saw earlier, and then he notices it, not a name, not directly, but a trail, edits made at specific hours. Revisions that align too perfectly to be coincidence, contributions that were never highlighted but always present, and he pauses, his hand still on the trackpad, the realization not dramatic, not sudden, but undeniable, because what he is seeing is not just work, it is a signature, one he dismissed without ever recognizing it for what it was. Across the city, under the soft glow of a small office that hums with quiet progress, Emily stands beside Daniel reviewing a finalized proposal, the air lighter, the energy focused, and when the client on the other end of the call expresses clear approval, there is no hesitation this time, no confusion about who shaped the outcome, just a direct acknowledgement that lands exactly where it should, and as she listens, her posture steady, her expression calm, she does not look back, not toward what she left behind, not toward the place that never saw her clearly, because she does not need to, not anymore, and miles away, in a space built on control and certainty, Alexander Hayes is staring at a pattern he can no longer ignore, a truth forming slowly but firmly, because the more he looks, the clearer it becomes, and with it, a realization that settles deeper than any mistake he has made before, not because it cost him money, not because it affected performance, but because it exposed something far more difficult to confront, that the one person he considered replaceable may have been the one holding everything together all along. The realization does not bring clarity the way Alexander Hayes expects it to, it brings discomfort, the kind that does not fade when you look away, the kind that follows you into every room and settles into every decision, and over the next few days, that discomfort sharpens into something far more difficult to ignore, because now that he has seen the pattern, he cannot unsee it, the missing precision, the delayed adjustments. The subtle but consistent decline in execution that no one else seems to fully understand, and it is not just about performance anymore, it is about accountability, about a gap that should not exist in a system he built to function without weakness, and yet here it is, undeniable. He calls for internal reviews, requests deeper breakdowns, asks questions that no longer accept vague answers, and slowly, reluctantly, the truth begins to surface, not in one dramatic reveal, but in fragments, in emails that do not quite align, in timelines that shift under closer inspection, in contributions that were attributed upward instead of outward, and the more he looks, the clearer it becomes that what he dismissed was never a lack of capability, it was a lack of recognition, a system that allowed someone else to stand in the light built by someone who remained deliberately unseen. The name comes later, not spoken with certainty at first, but mentioned in passing, a correction from someone who did not realize the weight it would carry. And when it finally lands fully, when Emily Carter is no longer just a vague absence but a defined presence in everything that used to work, something inside him tightens in a way he cannot dismiss as simple oversight, because this is not a minor error. This is a fundamental misjudgment, one that he made publicly, decisively, without hesitation, and now it stands in front of him in a form he cannot control or reverse. With a single command. Across the city, the contrast could not be more complete, because in a modest conference space filled with natural light and unfinished ideas, Emily stands beside Daniel and the rest of the team as they prepare for their first major client presentation since she joined, the energy focused but calm, built on preparation instead of pressure, and as she walks through the final points, there is no tension in her voice. No hesitation in her delivery, just clarity, the same clarity she always had. Now allowed to exist without being questioned before it is even heard, and when the presentation concludes, the response is immediate, direct, the kind of approval that does not need to be interpreted, and for a brief moment, the room holds that success in quiet acknowledgement, not exaggerated, not performative, just real. After the meeting, as the team disperses, Daniel steps closer, his expression thoughtful but steady, and he offers a simple observation. You do not just fix problems, you prevent them before they exist. And the way he says it carries no hidden agenda, no evaluation, just recognition, and Emily meets his gaze for a moment, a small nod the only response she needs, because she understands what that means, not just in the context of the project, but in the way she has learned to move through challenges without needing validation to continue forward. Later that evening, as she and Daniel walk out of the building together, the city lights reflecting softly across the pavement, their conversation shifts away from work, not abruptly, but naturally, into something more personal, small details, shared perspectives, the kind of exchange that builds connection without forcing it, and for the first time in a long while, Emily allows herself to exist in that space without the constant awareness of being measured, without the need to anticipate judgment, just present, just real, and she does not notice how that ease changes the way she carries herself, but someone else will soon, someone who has only ever seen her through the lens of control and assumption. Back in his office, Alexander stands at the window overlooking a city that once felt entirely within his grasp, his reflection faint against the glass, the file in his hand no longer just a document but a reminder, a record of a decision he cannot undo with authority alone. And as he looks out at the steady movement below, a thought settles in with a clarity that does not ask for permission, because now that he understands what he lost, the question is no longer whether he made a mistake. It is what he is going to do about it, and for the first time since the moment he dismissed her, the answer is not immediate, not simple, because this is not something he can fix by issuing an order, this is something that requires him to step outside the structure that has always worked in his favor. And that is something he has never had to do before. The decision does not come with certainty, it comes with resistance, because for Alexander Hayes, stepping outside of control is not something he has ever needed to practice, and yet over the next few days, that is exactly what he finds himself doing, not through declarations or dramatic changes, but through something far more unfamiliar: hesitation. Because every option in front of him now requires something he does not usually offer: acknowledgement without authority, accountability without control. And that realization follows him into a Friday evening event he would normally navigate without thought: a high-profile networking reception hosted in a downtown hotel where polished conversations and calculated introductions fill the air, where reputation is currency and perception is everything. And as he steps into the ballroom, nothing about him appears different. His presence still commands attention, still draws quiet recognition from across the room, but internally his focus is no longer on the usual priorities. It is searching, scanning, not for opportunity, but for confirmation of something he already suspects. He moves through conversations with practiced ease, responding when spoken to, offering just enough engagement to maintain the expectations placed on him. But his attention keeps shifting, drifting toward the far side of the room where a smaller group has gathered near one of the presentation displays, and that is when he sees her, not in a way that shocks him, not suddenly, but clearly, fully, without the distance that once made it easy to overlook her, because there is no ambiguity now, no context that reduces her presence to something secondary. She stands among her team with quiet confidence, speaking with a client whose expression reflects genuine interest, her posture relaxed but certain, her voice steady in a way that does not seek approval, and for a moment, the room around him fades into something indistinct, because what he is seeing does not align with the version of her he allowed himself to believe, not at all. Beside her stands Daniel Brooks, engaged in the same conversation, his presence not overpowering but aligned, and there is an ease between them that is impossible to miss, not forced, not performative, just natural, built on mutual respect rather than hierarchy. And that is the detail that unsettles Alex more than anything else, because it highlights something he never offered, something he never considered necessary. And as he watches, he realizes that she is not just functioning in this new space, she is thriving in it, in a way that has nothing to do with him, nothing to do with the structure he built, and everything to do with what she was capable of all along. He does not approach immediately, not out of uncertainty about what to say, but because for the first time, he understands that the timing matters, that stepping into her space now without thought would only repeat the pattern he is trying to confront, and so he waits, observing, processing, allowing the moment to unfold without interfering, something he has never done before. And when the conversation she is part of concludes, when the client steps away with clear approval and the group disperses slightly, that is when she turns, and their eyes meet across the distance, not by chance, not accidentally, but directly. And the recognition is immediate on both sides, but the reaction is not what he expects. There is no visible tension in her expression, no hesitation, just a calm awareness, as if she has already moved beyond the point where his presence defines anything for her. He takes a step forward then, closing the distance with measured intent, not rushed, not commanding, just present, and when he reaches her, there is a brief pause, not uncomfortable, but significant. Because this is the first moment they have shared since everything changed, and the weight of that is undeniable. And when he finally speaks, his voice is quieter than it has ever been in her presence, stripped of the authority that once defined it. "Emily," he says, not as a command, not as a label, but simply as her name, and for a second, that alone carries more meaning than anything he has said before, and she meets his gaze steadily, her response just as simple, just as controlled. "Alexander." And in that exchange something shifts, not resolved, not repaired, but acknowledged, because for the first time, they are standing on equal ground, and what happens next will not be decided by power, but by choice. For a moment neither of them moves, the noise of the ballroom continuing around them as if nothing significant is happening, but within that small space between them, everything feels different, heavier, more defined. Because this is no longer a dynamic shaped by hierarchy or assumption, it is something stripped down to its most basic form. Two people standing face to face with everything that was left unsaid now sitting quietly beneath the surface, and Alexander Hayes is the first to break that silence, not with the confidence that once made his words final, but with something more deliberate, more measured. "I was wrong," he says, and the simplicity of it is what makes it land, not dressed in explanation, not softened with justification, just stated. And for the first time since she has known him, there is no distance in his voice, no barrier of authority, just truth offered without protection. Emily listens without interrupting, her expression steady, not surprised, not moved in the way he might have expected, but attentive, because acknowledgement is not something she dismisses, it is something she evaluates, and when she responds, her tone is calm, grounded. "You did not just misunderstand me," she says quietly. "You decided who I was without ever asking." And there is no accusation in her words, no raised emotion, just clarity, and that clarity forces him to face something far more difficult than the mistake itself, the certainty with which he made it. He nods slightly, not in agreement alone, but in recognition, because he knows she is right, and for a moment, he looks away, not out of avoidance, but to gather something he has never had to articulate before, and when he looks back, there is no hesitation left. "I cannot change what I did," he admits, "but I can take responsibility for it." And the way he says it carries weight, not because of who he is, but because of what he is choosing not to hide behind, and for a second, the space between them shifts again, not toward resolution, but toward something more honest. Across the room, Daniel watches from a distance, not intruding, not stepping in, but present in a way that reflects trust rather than control, and that presence does not go unnoticed, because it represents something Alexander never offered, something he is only now beginning to understand, and Emily follows that awareness for a brief moment before returning her attention to the man in front of her. Her voice just as steady as before. "Responsibility is not something you say," she replies. "It is something you prove." And the words are not a challenge, not a rejection, but a boundary, clear and firm, and for the first time, Alexander does not push against it, does not attempt to reshape it to fit his expectations, he accepts it, fully, because he understands now that this is not a situation he can resolve with intention alone. The conversation does not continue much longer after that, not because there is nothing left to say, but because what remains cannot be solved in a single moment, and as the distance between them returns, subtle but real, something important has already shifted, not in their relationship, not yet, but in the foundation it would have to be built on if it were ever to exist again. And as Emily steps back into the flow of the evening, rejoining her team, her posture unchanged, her focus steady, she does not look back, not out of avoidance, but because she no longer needs to measure herself against what she left behind, and across the room, Alexander remains where he is for a moment longer, watching not with possession, not with expectation, but with something far more unfamiliar, respect, earned not through proximity.